Hallelujah, Shalom family, love to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Welcome. On this channel I discuss topics to edify and encourage the children of Yisrael to return to the ancient path of Yahuwah. I invite you to comment, like, subscribe, and share this video. Yahuwah, your word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. Open you our eyes that we may behold wondrous things out of your Torah. In Shaul's or Paul's letter to the Israelites living in the city of Corinth, we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, "But I would have you know that the head of every man is Mashiach, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Mashiach is Elohim. Every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head. But every woman that prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is even all one as if she were shaven." This passage, written by Shaul or Paul, has been heavily misunderstood and even ignored by modern Christian theology. But we're going to see that what Paul wrote is based in Hebraic culture. To really get a firm understanding of what Shaul or Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians, we're going to have to go and investigate the culture of the Fertile Crescent, the Shemitic culture. Then we're going to focus in on Israelite culture and fashion. In Mesopotamia, the region centered in present-day Iraq, near the Tigris and Euphrates River, a veil was a rectangular piece of cloth woven of linen, wool, or cotton, and worn by women to hide their faces from public view. While the veils worn by the wealthiest women could be beautiful, veils were not worn for fashionable reasons alone. Veils were one of the first legally enforced garments. Assyrian law dictated that wives, daughters, and widows must wear a veil, but prostitutes and slave women were forbidden from wearing a veil. The veil thus served as a way of protecting a father or husband's interest in his daughter or wife. The alluring face of a married or marriageable woman could not tempt men from beneath a veil. Wives, daughters, and widows would be severely punished for not covering their faces in public. But punishments also extended to male observers. If a man recognized a prostitute or slave woman wearing a veil and did not report her to an authority, he could be publicly flogged or beaten, mutilated, having his hand chopped off, for example, or imprisoned. So now we're getting an idea of the veil and its use in ancient Shemitic culture. We can find this idea of women covering themselves with veils in Hebraic culture as well. Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 24. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Yitzhak, or Isaac, she lighted off the camel. For she had said unto the servant, "What man is this that walks in the field to meet us?" And the servant had said, "It is my master." Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. So the veil in Hebrew is zaif, and covered in Hebrew is kasa. Zaif. Zaif means wrapper, shawl, veil. Kasa. Kasa means to cover, conceal, or hide. So we understand that Rebecca took the veil and covered herself. In other words, in Hebrew culture, women use veils to cover their form, to cover their beauty, to hide themselves. Here we can see a relief with the image of Israelite women going into captivity, and depicted as their fashion, they're wearing robes and their heads are covered with a long veil that goes all the way down to their ankles. So this is a typical depiction of an ancient Israelite woman wearing Hebraic fashion. On the right side of the screen, we have an image of the traditional dress of Beta Israel, the Jews of Ethiopia, and we can compare this dress to the image from the wall relief of Israelite women going into captivity, and we can see that they are both clothed with a veil that goes from the head down to the legs and is designed to cover not only the head but the form of the woman. Shemot, or Exodus chapter 22. If you at all take your neighbor's raiment to pledge, you shall deliver it unto him by that the sun goes down, for that is his covering only. It is his raiment for his skin, wherein shall he sleep? And it shall come to pass when he cries unto me, that I will hear, for I am gracious. In Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 24. And if the man be poor, you shall not sleep with his pledge. In any case you shall deliver him the pledge again when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his own raiment, and bless you, and it shall be righteousness unto you before Yahuwah your Elohim. So this word covering is kasuth, and this kasuth is the outer garment that the Israelite man would wear on top of their robe. This is what the modern day talit is based upon. So we see that they used the kasuth, this outer garment, this vesture, as a blanket when they slept at night. When we look at these images of wall reliefs of Israelites taken into captivity, on the right we see the men and on the left the women. And for the men we see that they're wearing robes, and over the robe they're wearing a kasuth, or a mantle, and this is what they will also use at night as a blanket. So the kasuth for the man is similar to the tzaif for the woman. So the woman would use the tzaif, or the veil, as a blanket at night. So we see that these similar garments, however, the men wore the garment over their shoulders, whereas the women wore it over their head. So when we look at remnants of Hebraic culture in Ethiopia, we have here images of Orthodox Christian Ethiopians, and we have again an image of a man and an image of a woman, and they're wearing what's called a gabi. So the gabi for the man, you see how he's wearing it over his shoulders, and the same garment, however the woman is wearing it over her head. So we see how the kasuth would have been worn by an ancient Israelite man, and how the tzaif would be worn by an ancient Israelite woman. And here we have another Ethiopian garment called the netela. The netela is made out of lighter fabric. So we see the men, how they wear it over their shoulders, and the women, how they wear it over the head, just as the kasuth for the ancient Israelite man and the taif for the Israelite woman. Yehuchanan, or John chapter 21. Therefore that disciple whom Yahusha loved said unto Kepha, or Peter, It is the Master. Now when Shimon Kepha, or Simon Peter, heard that it was the Master, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. So that word translated from fisher's coat is ependudes, and it means an upper garment, a wrapper, that is, outer garment. So that's similar to the kasuth, it was an outer garment. And the word naked is gumnos. Gumnos can mean naked, as in wearing nothing, completely naked. However, it can also mean ill-clad or not fully dressed, or clad in undergarments only. So if we understand Hebraic culture is very different from Greek culture. Public nudity is not tolerated, which is very different in Greek culture, where the Greeks commonly played sports completely nude. So when we look at Kepha was not nude in the sense that we think of it today. When it says that he was naked, it means that he was only wearing his basic undergarment. He was not wrapped in his kasuth, or his fisher's coat. So when we look at these different images of Israelites being taken captive, the image of the men on the right side would be considered fully clothed. You see that they have their undergarment, robe, and on top of their undergarment they're wearing a kasuth, and they even have turbans on their heads. Whereas on the left side, these men would be considered naked, not skin naked, but they're naked in the sense that they are not completely clothed. They're only wearing their undergarments. So we have to understand this bit of Hebraic culture in regards to clothing when we read what Paul or Shaul wrote in his letter to the Israelites in Corinth. Bamidbar, or Numbers chapter 5. Speak unto the children of Yasharal, and say unto them, If any man's wife go aside and commit a trespass against him, and the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be defiled, or if the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be not defiled. Verse 18, And the priest shall set the woman before Yahuwah, and uncover the woman's head, and put the offering of memorial in her hands, which is the jealousy offering, and the priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that causes the curse. So in this passage in Numbers, we see that this ritual that is to be performed if a husband is jealous, that the wife's head is to be uncovered. So it assumes that the woman is already wearing a veil, because this is Hebraic culture. The historian Josephus, in his work Antiquity of the Jews, he wrote, But if anyone suspect that his wife had been guilty of adultery, he was to bring a 10th deal of barley flour. They then cast 1 handful to Elohim, and gave the rest of it to the priest for food. One of the priests set the woman at the gates that are turned towards the temple, and took the veil from her head, and wrote the name of Elohim on parchment, and enjoined her to swear that she had not at all injured her husband, and to wish that, if she had violated her chastity, her right thigh might be put out of joint, that her belly might swell, and that she might die thus. So we see how the historian Josephus describes the same law that we read in the book of Numbers. And again, we see that it is assumed that the woman would be dressed as an Israelite, that meaning that she would have a veil over her head. Now we're going to go to Paul's letter. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Now I praise you, brothers, that you remember me in all things, and keep the ordinances as I delivered them to you. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Mashiach, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Mashiach is Elohim. So let's look at Ephesians chapter 5. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto Yahuwah. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Mashiach is the head of the assembly, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the assembly is subject unto a Mashiach, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. So we see how Shaul uses the symbolism of the head in 1 Corinthians and in his letter to the Ephesians. Verse 4. Every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head. Now Paul goes from talking about a symbolic head, meaning the authority, to the physical head. And that word covered here is kata, which means down from. We will see that Shaul or Paul is referring to the Israelite fashion of women wearing veils. So a man having his head covered with a veil dishonors his head, because this is something that is not acceptable to Yahuwah. Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 22. The woman shall not wear that which pertains unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are abomination unto Yahuwah your Elohim. And that word there, garment, is simlah. That means wrapper, mantle, covering garment. So this is the taif of the woman, the veil. A man who covers his head with a veil is breaking the Torah. He is sinning. Verse 5. But every woman that prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is even as one if she were shaven. For if the woman be not covered, let her also be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. So that word there, uncovered, comes from the Greek akata kaluptos, which means not covered, unveiled. So what Shaul or Paul was referring to was the veil that a Hebraic woman would be expected to wear. He's talking about Hebraic culture and Hebraic fashion. It's not any kind of covering, but he's particularly talking about a woman wearing a veil according to Hebraic fashion. That word there, dishonors, comes from the Greek kata ishkuno, which means to dishonor, disgrace, put to shame, make ashamed. And the word for shame comes from the Greek aiskron, which means shame, base, dishonorable. When we reference Mishlei or Proverbs chapter 12, a virtuous woman is a crown to her husband, but she that makes ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. So a woman who is not properly dressed as an Israelite woman, not properly covered or veiled is a shame to her husband. So now we're going to look at this issue of being shaved or shorn that Paul uses here. And this is actually a reference to Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 21. When you go forth to war against your enemies, and Yahuwah your Elohim has delivered them into your hands, and you have taken them captive, and see among the captives a beautiful woman, and have a desire unto her, that you would have her to your wife, that you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails. So what Shaul or Paul is saying here is, if a woman is not properly dressed as an Israelite woman, if she is not in Israelite attire, Hebraic attire, that is wearing a veil on her head, that it's the same as her being a foreign woman. We see in the Torah, when an Israelite man captures a foreign woman and desires to have her as his woman, that he is to bring her into his house, and the first thing he is to do is to shave her head. We need to remember that this letter was written by Shaul or Paul to the Israelites that were living in Corinth. Like many of his letters, he wrote to the Israelites that were scattered among the Gentiles. So these Israelites had been cut off from their heritage. They had been cut off from their culture. They were Hellenistic Israelites. So Shaul was calling them to return back to their culture and return back to the way they should dress properly. The word there, covered, comes from the Greek katakolupto. Katakolupto means to cover up, to veil or cover oneself, to cover wholly, that is, veil, cover or hide. So that is the same as what we looked at in the Torah with our mother Rebecca. She used a saif or a veil to kasa herself or to hide her body. So this is not a head wrap. This is not a turban. This is a veil that is worn over the head and covers the body. So when we break down katakolupto, kata means down from, throughout, according to, toward, along. And kalupto means to hide, veil, to hinder the knowledge of a thing, to cover up. So to hinder the knowledge of a thing, this veil is used to hinder the knowledge of the woman's form, her shape, her beauty, is to hide the form of the woman. I would like to invite you to join me in the next video where I continue this lesson of Paul's discussion of how Israelite women should be properly attired, especially in the assembly of the set-apart ones. I also would like to say thank you to those that have supported this channel by donating. Review questions. What does the Hebrew word saif mean? What does the Hebrew word kasa mean? What article of clothing did Israelite women traditionally wear? Traditionally, what is the difference between Israelite men's and women's clothing? What was the purpose of wearing a veil? To whom did Shaul or Paul write the letter of 1 Corinthians? Fear Elohim and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Bind up the testimony, seal the Torah among my disciples. Shalom, family. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the subscribe button. Like, comment, and share.